Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Catalyst of Change, where we have conversations to inspire transformation. My name is Alexia Cito, and I am so excited to be here with Allan Chuck, our special guest on today's episode. Welcome, Allan.
Thank you, Alexia. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. I like to call Allan my spiritual grandfather. Allan is what Francisco coined our rainbow grandfather. He grew up in the 70s in San Francisco. This is like the Beatles revolution, the love revolution. And he is one of Dr. and Master Sha, the founder of the Love Peace Harmony Foundation's leading teachers. And he has been with Master Sha for decades. And he has edited 29 of his books.
Something like that.
Wow. So it's like the keeper of so much wisdom. And it's just such an honor to be with you. So thank you so much. And you are a catalyst
But
of
yeah,
change, a big catalyst of change.
thank you, as you are.
So we want to dive into what is like growing up in the 70s in San
Okay.
Francisco.
Well, first I have to make a little revision. It was actually like the 60s. And because that was the start of all that you may have heard about, okay, that San Francisco is famous for historically. But actually, in the 50s, I was a child, so I have to back up a little more. And I grew up in an immigrant family. My parents were both immigrants from China. And I'm a US citizen, first one in our family, and almost didn't make it because I was in my mother's womb as she was coming from China to America. And for some reason, they had connections in California. So they first lived in the Central Valley of California, Stockton. But then they made some other connection. And when I was 1 month old, we moved to San Francisco. And nothing against Stockton, but I'm forever grateful that I grew up in San Francisco because at that time, I think it was probably one of the most diverse neighborhoods in all of North America that I grew up in.
Wow.
So we had mostly like a lot of immigrant kids from all kinds of backgrounds. Remember, we had Armenian kids, Japanese kids, black kids, Mexican kids, Japanese girl, um, really all over the world. An Italian girl too, I remember, and more.
Represent.
So, yeah, totally. So I wouldn't trade that kind of environment for anything because it taught me from a very early age that, appearance, skin color, all those things are just superficial. And so I knew that deeply in my heart and my bones from a young age, and
Wow.
that I wouldn't trade for anything.
Yeah.
But then going to the 60s, I was by that time in high school and went to college, and I don't know if you know because you're young, but that was the love generation in San Francisco, the hippie era, and you've heard of the Haight-Ashbury, I'm sure,
Yeah.
and our family home at that time was, well, let me count. 1, 2, 3, 3.5 blocks from Haight and Ashbury.
Wow. So, maybe explain a little for anyone listening.
Yeah, yeah. For anybody who doesn't know that ancient history, okay, the 60s were a very, very interesting time, as they say. And it was a time of great social change, okay? There was a lot of social movement with equity, racial equity, and more. Okay. So the civil rights movement really exploded in the 60s. It was a time of great political turmoil. The United States got into the Vietnam War in the 60s. And it was a time of great cultural change that was driven by the young people because they were all for justice, all for, not everyone, of course, but the large majority. They were all for, they were all against going to war and killing. Okay. And so there was this sort of like rebellion, you could say, on a social scale, on a cultural scale that, hey, we are here to make love, not war. That was one of the slogans, in fact. and it was a big, druggy era. It was a big music era. Music expressed, a lot of our sentiments, and San Francisco is kind of the cauldron, the birthplace of all that.
Wow.
And I grew up right in the midst of it. I remember right across from us, there was a rock band that I've forgotten the name of. They never became famous or anything. They weren't that good, but right across from us, we had a rock band, and they were loud at least. And I think 2 blocks from my home was the house where the Grateful Dead, one of the iconic groups, rock groups of that era, the Grateful Dead lived and practiced.
Mhm.
And
Oh.
and there were, like, concerts, really concerts in the Fillmore Auditorium and the Avalon Ballroom, and, my sister actually went to more of those than I did, but, we were right in the middle of all of it, and I still had a collection of, like, posters, concert posters from that era, and I don't know, I think I've still got them somewhere because they're actually worth some money now as collectibles. So, I growing up in that era was growing up, okay?
Mhm.
That was growing up, first of all, because you're just exposed to all kinds of things, all kinds of situations, all different kinds of people, which I was exposed to from the outset in this working class integrated neighborhood. But, of course, you had people that weren't for the things that I was for. I was for a lot of the things that I mentioned, but, I had to deal with all that, right? Had to navigate our way through all that, and at least felt like I was in a community, you
Mhm.
know? My values aligned with a lot of those values, and my mistakes aligned with a lot of the mistakes that we made too. So, hard as it may be to believe, that was a pretty wild time in my growing up, my development, my life, and I have to look back and say I'm very grateful for all of it, and I survived it because, unfortunately, I had a lot of close friends who did not survive it. 2 friends, 1 on each side of me, 1 block away, they got killed in Vietnam, and another very close friend died of a drug overdose, and another person died in an accident, and so that also taught me from a fairly young age that, life is so fragile, right? Because, I did some of those things that they did, and I could have easily lost my life. And so it all also made me wonder, why didn't I? I felt a little like guilt, you could say, survivor guilt, why me? Why them? Why not me? And I think I have some spiritual answers to that, but it was um it was a time of a lot of, I don't know, a lot of emotion, a lot of searching, a lot of trying to figure out things out, which I think everybody goes through in their teenage years or early 20s. And that was like a place where you had to confront every potential issue that could come up within yourself because that would come up all around you in
Mm.
other people, in other situations. And it made you realize what you had to look at in yourself as well. Now, I didn't realize it all right away. It took me a while, okay, because I was just right in the middle of it, going with the flow. But, looking back again, I wouldn't trade any of that for anything. It
Yeah.
was really formative.
That's what well, one thing I wanna touch on, and you just touched on it, is when you're in that, it was like, did you realize, like, you were in this, like, movement, this
Oh, yeah,
you know,
for sure,
did it
because we had mass protests and
Mm.
marches, like, when I went to college, it was just across the bay from San Francisco in the University of California, Berkeley, and that was a time when there were mass protests, and, the, governor of California called out the county sheriffs and I think the National Guard and more, and one person once he wasn't a student, but he was a protester, one student got killed, like, a block from where I was living. So, it was a very I think there's some of that now, in terms of the divisiveness in North America, especially in the United States, and in terms of, I wouldn't say intolerance, but there was definitely very strong views on both sides, and but at least one side was looking for unity, harmony, peace, all the things that you stand for in the Love, Peace, Harmony Foundation and movement. And the other side just sort of wanted to suppress all that and go on their, political journeys for power, wars, and whatnot. And I guess there's always that to some extent in society, right? There's always people like that, and there's always people like this, right?
Mhm.
But it was a fairly unified movement at that time. And it included like different communities that came together for that reason, like the civil rights movement and the young people and more. So I don't know what more to say about it. It was like not only was it a movement, it was a movement that sort of went across the country because after I spent 4 years in college at Berkeley, I did graduate school, moved to New York, and because before that I'd never been east of Nevada, never been east of Lake Tahoe in my life, but moved to New York City, and it's like everything that happened in San Francisco and Berkeley was happening a year later in New York City. So it was definitely at the source of a
Wow.
lot of the cultural and political and more change of that era. So,
Wow. It's like, you mentioned the survivor guilt and
yeah,
living through that.
yeah.
And
I wouldn't say it was major, but it just, it just made me wonder, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. Because I feel like there's people, could be our listeners, could be viewers that have, what it sparked for me was also what people now call like imposter syndrome, or
Mm,
this idea of having something happen, whether it's a success, whether it's surviving a
mhm,
traumatic event, like something where this person makes it through this thing in some way or makes it to this point in their life, and maybe others along the way are not no longer there for whatever reason. And so it's like this feeling of worthiness or many different dimensions to what they could be feeling.
yeah,
Eh,
I understand imposter syndrome, but I wouldn't say that's what I was experiencing. It was just, I felt lucky to some extent, but yeah, I guess you could say, why was I lucky? You know, why were these people unlucky? For instance, I had no desire to go fight, join the military and go to Vietnam. And at that time, we were all subject at our age, at the age of 18, to the military draft.
Oh my
Okay.
gosh.
And my year, when I turned 18, that was the first year they instituted a draft lottery in the
Mm.
United States. And I just know, you know, whatever else I knew about myself, because, I was still finding myself, as most 18, 17-year-olds are. And, but I just knew I was not meant to be a killing machine in this lifetime. And I was really scared of having to go into the army, for example. But that was the first year there was a draft lottery, and I got a draft number around 160. They had every day of the year. So it was somewhere in the middle, somewhere in the first half of the year, first half of the lottery, and had no idea whether I would be called to service or not, called to military service or not, because we didn't know how many people they would draft.
Mm.
Okay, to fight the Vietnam War, for example. So I just sweated it out, and I really thought that I might come to Canada a little earlier than I finally wound up going to Canada as maybe a conscientious objector, or maybe just as a defector running from having to serve in the army and kill people or be killed, right? So, But in the end, it turned out I was not drafted. Big sigh of relief. Uh, was able to continue my education and the rest of my fairly normal life after that.
Yeah. So many people going through these circumstances where we're put to do something so drastic that we may not want to do in our life. Maybe it's not what our heart and our soul's calling us to do. And I think one of the things you touched on that is really interesting, and it's come up in a few of our episode,
Mhm.
is like faith, like this higher power, something that's protecting us, that's guiding us, that's with us. So did you feel that, or at what point in your journey
No,
did
because, spiritually, I wasn't a consciously spiritual being for most of my life, and I guess you could say I was what they call an agnostic. I was very rational, very rational, very logical. I studied math and did advanced degrees in mathematics, which is all pure logic, basically, right? And so I didn't believe in a spiritual power or entity, God or whatever. But I didn't not believe either, you know. Just had to have tangible evidence given my mindset, given my nature, my logical nature, show me, prove it to me. Okay. If I saw some miracle, like if I saw Moses parting the Red Sea in front of my eyes, then I would believe it. Okay. But I don't know. Was this real? What was in the Bible? These fairy tale stories from other traditions? Are they real? Are they just myths? Are they fables? Or what? I have to see it to believe it. So I never really felt that. But that totally transformed later in my life
Mm.
after I met Master Sha in particular. It just was a source of wonder and not really a strong imposter syndrome, but some source of mystery to me and some feeling that I was lucky in some way for some reason.
Mm.
No idea why or how.
So that's interesting because you mentioned this shifting.
Yeah.
And I think also a lot of people may resonate with what you're sharing about,
Mhm.
being in that agnostic point of view you know,
Yeah.
and so my curiosity is like, what happened that shift? Because I mean, that's a lot of your life to be in that position and that perspective.
Yeah.
So what was it that shifted it?
I would say by the time I reached maybe 50, I met Master Sha in 2000. I was 52. By the time I turned 50, there were a couple of episodes where I could have easily lost my life and did not. And some of them were quite amazing. And one of them was that we lived in San Francisco. We lived in a suburb of San Francisco, my wife and I. Married a New Yorker, so my wife was a New Yorker, but we moved out to San Francisco and bought a little home, first home in San Francisco. But I remember the first time she came to San Francisco to visit me before we got married, she said, "Alan, what is it with you San Franciscans? You all talk slow, you walk slow, you think slow too." Because, she fit more the stereotype of the New Yorker, right? Hyper and very energetic. And even living in New York for 8 years, I actually loved that, you know? I love the energy of New York. I love the people. At that time, this was in the '70s, so I don't know if it's changed since, but uh, stereotype was a very talkative, right? But they were a little aloof, they would keep themselves, but that was not true at all. They were actually very open once you got to talk to people and know them. And I was a poor student, poor graduate student, but I didn't need money. All I needed to do was just go out, go on the street, watch people, connect with people, and that was like totally entertaining. What else did I need in my life? I would play pickup basketball and a lot, for example. And my life was complete as far as I was concerned at that time. But in where was I? Went off on a tangent. I lost the thread.
So the
Where were
spark
we?
where it
Sorry.
shifted with Master Sha that
Yeah.
you started to see,
Some
believe.
some things happened where we moved later to a suburb of San Francisco, and we had this favorite restaurant out on the coast in a small town called Point Reyes Station. Point Reyes is a big national monument in California. It's not far from San Francisco. It's a big, big peninsula that stretches out from the land into the Pacific Ocean. And there's a site there right as you enter the national monument. There's like a plaque, and it says right here in the 1906 earthquake, this is where the land moved like 17 feet at that time. But it's an amazing natural place, beautiful, wild, and there's a little town nearby, Point Reyes Station. We had a little favorite restaurant there. And we would drive out there from our suburban home on windy roads that go through the hills and things, carved out of the hills to the ocean. And one day it was wet, rainy, stormy, and but we went. And I had a lot of personal issues, shall we say, at that time. I had a lot of anger issues. I had a big ego, huge ego, impatient. I was an aggressive driver. I was very macho in many ways. And I'm sorry to say all this, but that is who I was for much of my life. And so I drove very aggressively for no reason. I mean, I wasn't angry. It was just the way I drove. And I started to lose control on this narrow, windy road, right? Carved out of the hills where you have a hillside, cliff on one side, and you have a drop on the other side of this two-lane road. So what happened? I lost control totally. Car spun, and it did like a 360. And where it stopped was in the one cutout. There was a one cutout in that stretch of road, one cutout within like 5 miles probably. My car just kind of spun and fit almost perfectly into that cutout. So, yeah, I don't know if my wife screamed. I think I might have screamed. I don't know. But we took a few deep breaths and continued. I drove much more cautiously. We did manage to enjoy dinner that night, but that was one pretty dramatic example. But there are others, and there are some incredible examples that after I met Master Sha. If you'd like to hear about them, I can share some.
Yeah, I'd
Okay.
love to hear.
Um, this was maybe a couple of years after I met Master Sha, certainly within 2 or 3 years, and I started to learn about spirituality, started to hear Master Sha's teachings, and I liked what I heard because being very logical, I thought everything Master Sha taught was very logical, and somehow it didn't seem that new to me. Seemed like it resonated with something that was within me already, and I believe that was probably past lives. Okay, but whatever it was, I didn't understand that at the time, but it made sense. So I became a fairly devoted student pretty early. And I was helping him because he had a very small team at that time. He came to San Francisco in 2000 from Vancouver, British Columbia, Toronto, had a very successful acupuncture practice in Vancouver, you know, 8 beds in his clinic, and he would just go from one to the other, boom, 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 needle people, right? Boom, boom, because his treatment is very special, very unique. So he'd literally treat 100 patients a day or more. But yeah, so I was just working, supporting him from home, and I was on the phone a lot, of course, connecting with people, students, clients, connecting with venues to arrange things for him, arrange engagements, connecting with the press, the media, and so it was like the secretary for everything. And was on the phone a lot, was on my computer a lot, so I did a lot, like, making flyers and things, And this was without the modern technology, modern software of 2025, right? This is 2001, 2002. So I actually created drsha.com.
No,
Yeah, I did. I did with the rudimentary tools that I had
that's
at that time. But at least it had a calendar. It had an interactive calendar where you could click on something, right, and get the details about the events and stuff. So it was functional. But here I was
for
working.
anyone listening, that's the website that's still used today, like the domain.
It's a little different today.
Little
That's
different.
all I can say. But here I was working in front of my on my at home in front of my computer on the phone, headphones on, right? And then one day I walk in and my headphones are nowhere to be seen. And I don't go anywhere with them. I mean, that was my life. Sleep in my bed, take a shower, and work in front of my computer, okay, when I wasn't with Master Sha directly. And I just worked without my headphones for a day or two. Then I went out to the backyard, out through the garage, and there are these paving stones, right? Like a little walkway out the garage to the outdoors. And right in plain view, right there, were my headphones. And I know that I did not take them out there, drop them there. I knew that nobody else took them there, dropped them there. And I know that they might not have been there the day before because I might have gone out the day before and they weren't there.
Mhm.
So I knew that this was some unearthly power.
Mm.
Okay. And another one quick example is that another time around that same time, I was in bed and I rarely remember dreams. I don't have any sleep issues in my life. I rarely remember dreams. And I actually don't like sleep. Sorry to say. I don't like sleep because I like to do things. I like to act, okay? I don't like sleep for that reason. And now it's because I want to serve, right? I have a burning desire to serve and complete my tasks and things like that. But even at that time, I was kind of driven to do things like if I had a hobby, I would really dive into it deeply. It was something that I really loved, really wanted to know more about, really wanted to get better at, whatever it may have been. But one night as I was sort of half in that half drifting off stage, suddenly it was like I heard a thunderstorm. And this was like a perfectly clear California evening, Northern California evening. Heard a thunderstorm in the distance. I saw some lightning through my half closed eyes. And now I know this was my third eye showing me stuff, right? But then my legs started to lift off the bed and I felt like I could levitate. And but I was afraid, and I think that fear stopped me from the possibility of levitating. But by that time, I'd started to do spiritual communication, soul communication, learning directly from Master Sha. He taught like 15 or 20 of us on the phone for hours in those days. And there's some of the longtime teachers that now, Alexia, like Marilyn, Patricia, Francisco, I think was there, Jimena, Lynn Lucina from the Toronto area, and more. But I did a soul communication. They told me, Alan, this is just an example of our power. You understand our power, but this is also a little taste of what power and abilities you could receive.
Mm.
So by that time, I was totally bought in. Okay, totally bought in, totally believed in something that is unseen. As Masha says, Tao cannot be seen, heard, or touched. Right? Felt. So I totally bought into that by that time. But and this was very early, and even before I met Master Sha. I want to share one more story. Okay, so um, probably the first year I was working for Master Sha, supporting him, he was living in a student's grandmother's vacant house. Student grandmother had passed away way at the far end of San Francisco, the southern end of San Francisco. So I lived in a suburb across the Golden Gate Bridge north of San Francisco. So it was a long commute during rush hours when I would go visit him in the morning to support him. But, I said I was really impatient and angry driver, but I learned how to chant when I drove, and I had no issues with that long commute. Also because I really wanted to help Master Sha for what he did for my wife and me. But one night, I actually didn't have as much energy then, 24 years ago, than I do now. And one night as I was driving home late at night, no traffic, but I nodded off. I fell asleep driving on the highway.
Oh,
Not a good thing to do.
no.
I woke
So
up.
dangerous.
When I woke up, for those people who might know or look up the geography, I drove home across the Golden Gate Bridge on Highway 101. When I woke up, I was on Highway 37. Highway 37 takes you from 101 almost on a right angle turnoff, and it takes you to the Napa Valley, the wine country, the famous wine country in California. And when I woke up, I saw that I was like 5 miles down Highway 37. And the highway, all of these highways had these dots, the dots in the lanes where if you go over out of your lane, it makes a bump and a noise to wake you up. I was blissfully asleep the whole time.
Wow.
So who was taking care of me
Mm.
that time? I think you know, Alexia. I think heaven's saints, heaven sent animals were driving the car, right? And so I knew I was very protected and very loved, and finally I figured out, okay, why was I able to live until the age of 52? Unlike too many of my friends, that I had some other purpose that I needed to be around for. And that purpose is very similar to your purpose, but you discovered at a much younger age. If I discovered at a much younger age, I don't know, I might be a bit different, but I would have probably created a lot less hurt and more for others, but it's never too late.
Yes.
Never too late.
And that's such an inspiration for so many of our viewers and listeners that, well, it's never too late. And no matter where you're at on your journey, younger, older, like we have the power to make a change. We have the power to transform. We have the power to be in that purpose. And, people might listen and say, well, I don't know what my purpose is.
Right. I didn't know what my purpose was. I didn't have a purpose. I wasn't even looking for a purpose. You know what my purpose was when I was 50? I was in the corporate world for more than 20 years, reached a nice managerial position and everything, had a good team and worked well with them. But my only purpose at that time was to just make enough money, which was very much in reach, and retire, which was very much within reach to retire by the time I was 50 or certainly by the time I was 55. But then what? I didn't have any purpose. Ideally, I love the sun. I love to be outside and move, which is interesting because I don't do that very much now, but I still love that. So what would I have done? I would have, maybe moved to some resort community, some beach area, and just rotted on the beach, basically, for the rest of my life, however long that would have been. And, I would have had enough money had that come true. I would have lived well, quote unquote, eaten well, quote unquote, and more. But what else would I have? I think my life would have been pretty empty without a purpose. Other than that,
Yeah.
but now I have a purpose. I understand what my purpose is, and I have it, and um, I'm just grateful every day. However much time I'm given, I'm just grateful, and I will always follow my purpose.
Mm. And you are a catalyst of change, finding that purpose and living that purpose. You inspire countless others. You have students around the world that look to you for love, for guidance, that adore you, that you have transformed their lives through everything Master Sha has shared with you and empowered you. You've turned into and you are this amazing like spiritual leader and teacher and someone who really has sparked this transformation around the world. And
Oh, that's very kind. I would just say, yeah, great change is possible. I'm still working on great change is all I'll say, but if I can be any kind of example of how much can be transformed, I'm happy to be that example. Anger, ego, all those things I mentioned and more.
you're an amazing example. Not that I really knew you before in those I just
You wouldn't wanted
the
to.
chanting
You wouldn't have wanted to know
thing.
me before. No. I
Well,
I
maybe the person I was, I would have
I don't know about that even. No, I don't think so. I don't.
so you might care okay, but there's one thing we have not touched on that I would like to touch on because you were one of the very few people
Yes.
in existence that was walking in the redwood forest in California with Master Sha when he received what anyone, if you're listening for the first time, the Love Peace Harmony song, you gotta go listen to it. But the Love
Absolutely.
Peace Harmony song. So what was that like?
That was first of all, Master Shah even then rarely took downtime,
Mm.
right? We know he works tirelessly, you and I know. I hope all our viewers will get to know what a tireless, unconditional servant he is, how he gives unconditional love, care in every moment, no matter how tired or busy he is, right? If somebody needs him, he is there, right? And so somehow we talked him into taking a little downtime. And I must say, I kind of follow his example in some ways because now I'm in downtown Toronto. And having lived in Toronto for more than 18 years, because Masha asked me to move here at the end of 2006, I have probably not seen 98 or 99% of Toronto. So
We've
I
got
know I need to get out more. Maybe I need to get out more. But but we got him out and we took him to Muir Woods National Monument, beautiful redwood grove forest, just across the Golden Gate Bridge, 10 miles north of San Francisco. And it's surrounded by Mount Tamalpais on one end, and the ocean is not far away, the Golden Gate very close as well. And first of all, we got him to go there, which was a minor miracle in itself. Then, as we parked in the lot, got out of the car, he he asked heaven, I think it was Su Chin, actually another master teacher, suggested, "Why, Masha, can you ask for a song for your mission from God, from the divine?" And he said, "That's a great idea." So the minute we got out of the car, he connected with heaven. He's a very high level spiritual being, great channel. And as he recounts it, he said, a flash of light, rainbow light, came down from the heart of the divine through his crown into his body. He felt it, he vibrated with it, and he heard lula lula li, lula lula li, lula lula li, lula lula li, lula lula. He heard the lyrics of something, a poem or whatever it was, but he knew this was the divine speaking to him in soul language. The divine's language, the language of the divine soul, which is the universal language. As you know, your soul, your soul, all your listeners' souls speak soul language, understand soul language. It is a truly universal language. And then he asked God for a melody. God told him this was a song, so could you give me the melody? Lula, lula, lee, lula. Let's sing it together quickly in soul language. Yeah. Lula, lula, lee, 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 lula. And so he said, "Alan, write down the lyrics, lula-lee." And then he repeated the melody a few times, trying to remember the melody, right? And so he said, "Remember the melody," to all there were 3 of us with him at the time, 3 of his students, and we all got it. He said, "Write it down." We all got it, so we practiced singing it, and then Master Sha translated into his native language, Mandarin Chinese. And then as we're walking around in Muir Woods, we entered Muir Woods and walked on the main simple trail. And like, I don't know, 150 feet away, there was this family with a young girl. And we were just singing very softly, first of all. So we didn't want to disturb anybody, of course. But the young girl was ahead of us. And I guess she heard us, or her soul heard us, or maybe both, and she turned around and looked at us, and she raised her arms that made some young child sound. "Wah! Wah!" She loved it, and we spent, a couple of hours there exploring the trails, different areas of the park, and when we came back to the parking lot area through the same core area, we saw the same family again, the same girl again, and she did the same thing again, okay? And then we drove to the, seashore not far away, and as we're walking on the beach, we worked together on the English translation. And the English translation was very straightforward except for the 3rd line. "Loo-la, loo-la-lee, loo-la." And, you can explain that later. It's probably explained on the Love, Peace, Harmony site. But the literal translation in Chinese doesn't really resonate with the melody in English because the Chinese is like probably like would take 8 or 10 words in English,
Mm.
and we just couldn't sing it to the melody. So we had different suggestions, and we all tried to translate in English together, and we couldn't be very literal, so we looked for some other ways to get the essence of that meaning in Chinese. And Master Sha would check everything, with divine guidance because that's how he does everything, as you know. Doesn't make any major decision, and he doesn't even make many minor decisions, what I would consider minor decisions relatively, without checking divine guidance. He is truly an unconditional servant of the divine and Tao source. He asks them, "What do you want me to do? What is right here? Is this better? Is A better or is B better?" And he always follows. He has no attachment to his personal feeling, his personal idea, his personal thinking. Okay, he just listens to heavenly guidance. And so we finally got approval for joined hearts and souls together, as you know. Okay. And after that, we went to Sausalito, which is a waterside town just across the Golden Gate Bridge again, on the inland side, not the ocean side. Okay, famous tourist place also. We had a nice meal there, and we were singing all the time because we loved it. And we were singing gently again. It was a crowded restaurant, but one of the I think it was a waitress came by and to serve us, and she said, "Oh, what is that? You're singing." And Nasha says, "It's a soul song. Have you ever heard of a soul song?" I said, "No, I've never heard of a soul song, but I like it." And so we sang it for her, and she called a couple of other, like, waiters, busboy, and there were 3 of them standing beside our table, ignoring all the other diners, right? Not doing their job, but they stayed there for a minute or 2 just listening to us sing. and the rest is history, I guess.
It is. It absolutely is. And it continues. You know, like this amazing song with such a powerful message. I love my heart and soul. I love all humanity. Join hearts and souls together. Love, peace, and harmony. And recently, Master Sha mentioned join hearts and souls together to create a harmonized world. Love, peace, and harmony, which I thought was so powerful.
That's actually more like the Mandarin translation, the original translation, to create a harmonized world.
Why?
Yeah.
Oh, so it's amazing, you know, to receive this experience from you because you were really there and you
I
had
was the one that wrote down "Ooh la ooh la lee." I'm glad I wrote it down accurately if I made a mistake.
that is so special and so amazing, you know, and so we're so grateful that you're able to come on Catalyst of Change. And we have one final question
Sure,
because we ask everybody this question.
sure.
And it is if you could be a catalyst
Uh-huh,
for change of something in the world
uh-huh.
right now, what would that be?
Well, what I've been empowered to be is healing, transforming people's challenges, blockages. It's basically the same thing you do in your role, right, Alexia? It's to bring love, peace, and harmony to people. And you and I, others Master Sha has trained, have been tremendously empowered. You know, I have a little different role at this moment with Master Sha and his organization, but, you know, I used to travel a lot and just teach Master Sha's wisdom about the soul, the power of the soul, and heal. And I would just connect with students all around the United States in particular, and they would help me arrange, like, workshops, connect with organizations, and they would put me up in their homes, so I was doing this on my own dime, so they made it very affordable for me, and that was great because, you know, made good connections with, a community that has a common purpose, common goal, and together we work to spread what we've been empowered to do to bring love, peace, and harmony to people, to help heal people from their pain, from their sickness, from their suffering, whatever it may be in their life, and just bring awareness of that change is possible. Just as you said, my personal transformation, that is possible. If I can do it, anybody can do it and more. Okay?
Mhm.
But also that change is possible for anything you're going through, anything people are going through, because that is what Master Sha brings to humanity. And you and I both, we are here to help make humanity much more aware of that, to benefit from it. You know, right now we have maybe hundreds of thousands of followers, maybe millions of people who are aware of Master Sha, his teachers, love, peace, harmony, soul healing, whatever it may be. But that's not enough. You know, we need to reach hundreds of millions, billions, because that's how many people are suffering.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Alan, for your love and for your commitment and for joining us and sharing your journey and all
My
the
pleasure,
wisdom.
my honor. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Love you. Bye-bye. Love you all, listeners.
Yes, and we want to thank everyone, all our viewers, our listeners for joining us on Catalyst for Change with Allan Chuck. And we want to
And Alexia Cito.
and Alexia Cito. Thank you. And we want to welcome you to share in the comments, to like, to share this podcast. And we want to welcome you to join us on our next Catalyst of Change and to go out in the world and be a catalyst of change in your own community. We will see you
I
in the
can do
next
it. You can do it. You can do it better.
Woo! Yes!
All right.